So just a few questions and we'll go from
Okay,
there.
okay.
I'm ready.
So first of all, Barbara, can you tell me your name and how did you get here today?
Barbara Robinson, and I came from Leek and I've driven here.
Fantastic, it's just so we can
Do
check
this,
our levels.
okay.
Did you have lots of snow in Leek?
We did a bit, yes, actually. Not lots.
I took my kids up to Tittersworth last Saturday,
Yeah.
and because I just thought there'd be a bit of snow, but loads. It's brilliant, isn't it?
It's all gone now, thank heavens.
Oh, right, it's not fine.
No, yeah.
So first of all then, Barbara, can you tell me a little bit then about your kind of like history working in ceramics? Tell us kind of like how long you've been working in the pottery industry for, when you started, where you've worked, that kind of thing, please.
Okay. I started on Johnson's in Hanley, and it would be in the 1966, I think it was. I was 16, and it was the closest factory to where I lived. So it was an easy thing to get to work. And because there were so many jobs in that, that time, you could pick and choose where you wanted to go. So that was the first one I went to. I started work as a trainee transferrer, which is very different from what the modern way of doing things now. And it actually stopped. They stopped doing transferring in the 1970s. So I think there's one factory now that actually does a little bit of it. It was putting patterns on plates that was done via a print being put on a tissue paper. And you cut it out and moulded it to whatever, cup, saucer, plate. And it went on a machine that pressed the pattern onto it, or we actually physically did it with a brush and put the pattern on that way, and then it was washed off. But it was the oldest way of printing. It must have started in the 1700s, and that was the way it progressed. But it stopped with mechanism when the machines came in. Johnson's was a great place for me. All the people that I worked with, I got on very well with. I loved the work because it was a training. It was piecework, so you could earn as much money as you wanted, which was in the 60s was, revolutionary really for a young girl. And I always think it's sort of, I only worked for 9 years in the pottery industry, but it was between those fundamental, times for a young woman, and a young man, I suppose, really, because you learn so much in that particular time. It's not just learning a job or, a skill. It's all the people that are around you. And that was what was good. I always class it as a bit like my university, because everybody's got a character. So you have to listen to people. It was just a lovely way. And whenever I think back on about that part of my life, I can't help but be thankful I went through it, I mean, I do like to do things, I do art at the moment, and I take photography, I do all of that. So I am a bit of a hands-on. In later life, I didn't actually do that because I went into business, so that was a very different side of me. But that was a real basic, it made me, I think, who I am, really, or, well, part of who I am. And it was down to the people that I worked with. I was lucky enough to work with a lot of lovely people, hence the people in the photographs that, if you look at them, they were all friends.
That was a really good response.
Sorry,
You've kind
too
of
much.
answered some of my other questions, but I'm going to ask you them anyway.
Oh.
What I want to ask first, though, is to pick up on, you mentioned piecework there.
Yes.
Now, a few people have mentioned piecework to us. For the uninitiated, if you
Okay.
treat me as, I do know what it is, that's what I'll pretend I don't. Tell me, what was piecework?
Well, you were trained to say plates. We'll talk about plates. So you were trained to put a pattern on a plate, and somebody would come in and time you doing that pattern, and how long it would take you to say do 30 plates on a pattern, and you were paid for doing 30 plates in X amount of time. If you could do it quicker than that time, then you were paid extra for the other plates that came in. Time and motion was what they actually did. They came in and it called time and motion, and so they are the people that assessed it. So and you'd have different dozens as well. So everybody worked in dozens. This is how you actually work. So you might have 30 plates to a dozen. Cups, you might have 72 cups to a dozen, because it's all worked on a time factor. Teapots, which probably took you a hell of a lot longer, you'd probably only have 8 to a dozen. But of course, above and beyond that, if you did more than your number, that money was just saved up. So at the end of the week, you got a lot more money. You had to work very hard for it. It didn't come easy, you know. I think that's the best way of me explaining it. Does that seem okay?
Yeah. I think what was quite interesting was you mentioned that during the 60s, it was almost like a revolutionary thing for a woman in the workplace to be able to earn that amount of money. That's quite an interesting thing to say, because obviously attitudes back then were slightly different, particularly towards women at work. How did it feel then to be able to be able to?
Well, I think that because I was a child through the 50s, just after the war, so I can remember my mother, you know, and lots of other people. We were all in the same sort of boat, and money wasn't available as such, you know. I mean, I can just about remember rationings when I was about 5. You know, we were still doing all of that. So people didn't have a lot of things. So to reach 16, you know, and go straight into a job where they were paying you a good wage, and within 6 months, like for me, because I was very good at what I did, I was earning a man's wage. Well, of course, that went back into the home I lived in. You know, I gave money to my mum. So within a few years, that whole industry in my mother's house got better. So it was a revolutionary thing on that thing, you know. But in the pottery industry, people had always been paid, I wouldn't say wonderfully well, but they'd always been paid good. I mean, most people in Stoke-on-Trent, most women worked in the pottery industry. You know, when I spoke to people, I'd say probably 70%, 75% maybe were women. But there was very few men. You know, in the department I worked in, there was 2 men, and they were printers. The rest were women. And there could have been 30 in that one department. So it was led by women totally. And I can remember we used to moan about the wages, and we used to sort of say, "Oh, we're having a rise this year." But I think that was normal, you know. As I say, it was hard, but I always felt as though I could have earned, you know, it would have been nice to have had more money, but I still think it was a good wage. But maybe that's just attitude, because you didn't have any money prior to that, so you were thankful for what you got.
Working, you mentioned then 75% of your kind of workforce on that ticket bottom were women. What was the atmosphere like amongst you and your colleagues?
Oh, it was when you were first training, it was serious, you know, because you got to get on with your training, and if you weren't capable of doing what they wanted, then they'd have probably taken you out and you'd have gone into another department, or even probably sacked, told to go home type of thing. So you did have to take it very seriously. But once you were doing the job, everything became very easy. Everybody helped each other. And the younger people would help the older people if they hadn't completed their task for that morning, you know. Or so it was all very interactive. It was all very, very good. You looked at for everybody else, you know. I mean, if I'd sort of done a lot of work in the morning and thought in the afternoon I'd slow up, I would slow up, but I'd also go and help the woman that needed a bit of help in front of me, or they'd come and help me. So it was very interactive like that.
And on the photo you showed me, it was like people having a lot of fun. Was it a fun environment? I mean, like, were things like birthdays celebrated? Were people encouraged to be happy, to sing, to have good time?
Oh yes. I mean, all of that. I mean, usually in the mornings, from what I can remember, the machines would be on. So you know, the work that we did in the mornings had to go on a machine to be pressed on. The patterns had to be pressed on. So it was very noisy. So it was a noisy environment. But in the afternoons, us, the women in the shop, would actually say, we want teapots to come in, or we want big plates to come in, because the machines didn't go on then, and we had to do it all by hand, which meant then we could talk to each other. There was always singing. there was always singing. One woman would start off and then people in different departments would hear, and they'd all come through, and somebody would say, "Oh, a request, will you sing me this? Will you sing me that?" It was a choir, you know what I mean? They loved that, and of course we also talked. We had debates, about everything, from the Beatles to the Union. Everybody talked about things, and everybody said what they wanted, and if somebody thought you were not probably, you're not saying the right thing, they would just come in and say, "Well, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that?" I mean, the boss that I worked for, he was quite wonderful, actually. And because I lived so close, occasionally he would go past my house, knock on the front door, and say to my mother, "Barbara's doing all right." You see, things like that, everybody knew really a lot about each other. Christmas time we had parties, and we would be allowed, you'd finish work around about 3 PM or whatever. We were allowed to have a party. People who birthdays, yes, you would take cakes in. I had my 21st when I was on the factory, and they all chipped in and bought me a lovely little ring, When I left the factory, they all gave a big party. I mean, even years later, when I had nothing to do with the pottery industry, I would still go and visit. There's a lady on the photograph, Dot, who was the forewoman. I used to go and visit her. I also used to go and visit Bill Blue, which was my boss at that particular time, because they were a big part of you growing up. It wasn't just go to work and that was it. You came away. And I think that was why it just all felt as if it was a big family, really.
That was a fantastic answer. Thank you. You mentioned then the union. Were you part of the union when you were working?
You had to be part of the union.
So what kind of role did the union play in the pottery workers' life, and did you feel supported by the union as well?
I can remember having a big debate about the union in my department, and because I can't remember exactly what was happening, but there was something going on. It probably would be to do with factories closing and all of that, And I knew that I'd said to one of the girls, "Oh right, that's it. I'm not paying my union subs anymore." And they went and fetched a union man who came in, who told me, "Well, okay, you can stop that, but we will take the union money out of your wages and send it to charity." I stayed in the union. But it was, for me, because the industry died a death, over the years. It's coming back a little bit here. I don't think that the union or the government helped to keep everything going. It's one of those things, it's who do you blame? The company Johnson's, who I work for, we exported to America. We didn't do anything that was sold in England. All of the work that we did went to America and other countries. I was in New Zealand in September, went into a charity shop and picked a plate up that was one of the designs that we did. Could have been the plate I did, because once that transferring stopped, everything that's out in the world now, that's it. There's no other. It wasn't made in any other way. So it went all the way around the world, and yet it just all finished. It all just stopped. Which to me, even though by then I'd left the industry and I wasn't going to be working in the industry anymore, there was all of these young people that could have come up, that would have been, especially in Stoke-on-Trent, and just trained like I'd been trained, and been earning their wages. And to get onto that side can be very political.
Well, of course.
But that's, sorry.
No, it's quite all right. It's really interesting what you've got to say. Just to kind of go a little bit more political. As a woman working in an industry which was, quite a heavy manufacturing industry, which wasn't necessarily always where you might envisage when you're working, did you ever feel that you were not necessarily discriminated against, but treated differently as a woman in the workplace? How did it feel to be a woman working in a factory?
I can't say I ever felt that, actually. For the simple fact, when you were a piecework, and that you weren't sitting aside of a man in my shop doing the same job as me, and he wasn't paid more money than me. So I couldn't compare that, you know. So yes, maybe the men that were in the shop printing printing the stuff, maybe they were paid more money. Should imagine they were actually. But I never felt as if I was doing something that underpaid. And not only that though, in that particular time, you could go and get another job. You could walk off the factory at lunchtime and you'd be in another job next morning. And everybody knew that. I mean, at one time when I was just before I was 18, I was working full-time on Johnson's. I also did a night shift for them because we'd had a big order come in. So that was 6 till 8. And on the Friday night, I used to go and wait on in a Chinese with my sister in Stoke. But it was all money related, you know what I mean? So, answer to your question, no, I didn't feel as though the men I felt threatened in any way and they were getting more than I was.
Do you feel almost how important do you think the role of women working within the pottery industry was? How important were women in the workplace?
Oh, they were what was keeping it all afloat, in my eyes, because that was like say if there's 75% of your workforce are women, you know, then or if there'd have been 75% of men, that's what your work's all about, isn't it? You know, as a business person, you're only as good as your workforce. In my eyes, I mean, I've been in business since, and I employed people, so therefore I knew no matter how much I put into my job, if them people didn't do the job properly, my business would have gone flat. So to me, the industry was just run by the women. And I just thought that was a great idea to do, you know, great thing to do.
Do you think it was almost kind of, you mentioned piecework, being able to earn a lot of money and women having a big influence in the factory. Do you think it almost empowered women almost?
Oh, I think it did. I always have done. I think women working in any form, and if the money goes back into the family, then it helps the family, so they become better for it. You know what I mean? It's my grandmother. She came down from Yorkshire to work in the pottery industry, and you know, she had a great house, great children. You know, lived quite wealthy really. If she hadn't have worked, then there'd have been no money going into that household. So, no, I think it's equal, men and women working. In my eyes, the more of you that can work in a family, the better it's going to be for you.
Fantastic answer. We're kind of nearing the end now. What do you sort of... sorry, Anne, would you mind to keep me around? Just check that there's no... I think we are due somebody out there.
Okay.
That makes sense. Just mind keeping me... Yeah. Just let them know, Peter, for 5 minutes. So I saw that. What do you feel? I mean, you mentioned you only worked in the pottery industry for 9 years, but obviously you've got a very keen eye for what's happening within manufacturing, within Stoke-on-Trent. How do you feel that maybe the pottery industry has changed since you worked in the pots to maybe how it is today?
Well, I should imagine the actual working, you know, the production is just the same as it was when I was there. Other than there's more probably machinery and they probably don't do as much intricate work as probably we did then, because it's, you know, maybe you don't want to have a pattern on and then a load of gold on and a load of enamelling on top. It costs a lot more money. So that's slightly different on things. But I think, I mean, I wish there was more. I do wish there was more, because it's a shame to see a dying trade go away, isn't it, really? And we've got such great buildings still around, you know. But you've got to have the people who want to do it as well. So there's all of that, really.
I mean, there's a good ceramics course at Staffordshire University. It seems as though, to some extent, a lot of manufacturers are starting to reinvest in Stoke again, and it still plays a significant role in local industry. If I was a woman, not, but if I was looking to pursue a career in ceramics today, do you have any advice to women for future generations?
Oh well, I mean, if you're really interested in pottery, then yes, I think it would be a lovely thing to do. I mean, I've just watched the potter Keith who did on the TV this morning, and he was throwing a pot. I can't throw a pot, right? I'd love to throw a pot. I think to actually, you know, manhandle that sort of clay and make something that you could actually then use, I think it's a lovely thing. So for me, I think if anybody's in the pottery industry, going to the Ceramic Institute and all of that, they must push it. It's a worthwhile job, and if we don't do it, China will do it. Other countries will do it. You know what I mean? We still need a cup and saucer. We still need a mug. It will always be there. So for me, and it's such a fabulous art form in my eyes, you know. But I'm biased because I was. You know, I know what it was like when I was a young person, and I did really like that. So I definitely say go for it. You know, do as much as you can for the industry as well.
And it's clearly something that means a lot to you still. Are you proud to have been a part of the pottery industry and spent 9 years working in the pots? And if you are proud, why are you proud of it?
Yes, I am. I did some inspirational speaking for the Prince's Trust for older people and who wanted to go into business. And the thing I spoke about, first of all, was my first 10 years of my working. From 16, I came out of school with no education and went straight into the pottery industry. And yet that was such a fundamental thing for me. And it wasn't just earning the money, you know, it was also to do with, I felt as though I was doing something good. You know, I thought I was doing something beautiful. It was going off to wonderful countries around the world, you know, and all of that. I was really taken with all of that. And then I got this wonderful community of friends around me who pushed you, who would question, you know, when we were sitting talking. And I'd sort of always say, well, I'd love to do this, I'd love to do that. Somebody would say, well, you must try, you must go. So there was all of that sort of verbal going on. It's like having a group of friends when you're all talking about something and you're saying to each other, well, have a go of it, go and do it. And that was what it was. And I do think sometimes, because some of the young people have got no jobs and they've got no like community like that, and I can understand why they're lost, because there's nobody around them just talking about what it would be like to do that. I used to go home every day and I used to think I've done a fantastic job, you know, it's been lovely all day. They've paid me money for it, and I've had probably one of the biggest laughs going with all my friends, you know.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Barbara. I managed to stifle my cough.
Sorry, well, I hope I haven't gone on too much.
You haven't. There were some fantastic answers. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that.
No.